Don't open that trunk. It was the first thing the woman had said in 17 days, and she said it with Jonah Creed's old shotgun leveled at her ribs. Dawn had only just broken over Dry Hollow. The light came copper-red through the warped kitchen window, catching dust in the air and turning it to smoke. Jonah stood barefoot on the floorboards, one hand still on the iron latch of the cedar trunk beside the stove. The woman he had hired as a silent housekeeper was no longer silent. Her voice was low, steady, and dangerous in a way that made the back of his neck tighten. Outside, wind scraped the porch like a dull knife. Somewhere in the yard, a horse stamped and snorted. The house smelled of coffee grounds, lamp oil, and the faint sharp scent of rain that had not yet fallen. Jonah lifted his eyes to hers. So you can talk. She did not lower the gun. Enough. 3 weeks earlier, she had come to him out of a dust storm with a carpetbag in one hand and blood drying on the hem of her dress. She had written her name on a scrap of feed paper with a carpenter's pencil. Ada. No surname. No explanations. Then she had pointed at his sink full of dishes, the gray sheets hanging limp on the line, and the mud tracked across his hallway, as if to say that any half-dead fool could see he needed help. He had almost laughed at that. Dry Hollow Ranch had not held a woman's hand in it since his wife, Ruth, was lowered into the cemetery 5 winters before. Since then the place had gone lean and bitter around him. Dust on the mantel, rust on the gate chain, silence at supper. Jonah could mend a fence in moonlight and doctor a calf in a hailstorm. But he had forgotten how to keep a home from feeling like a grave. So he hired her, not because he trusted her, because he trusted the way she moved. She moved like someone who saw every exit in a room, like someone who counted knives, windows, footsteps. She scrubbed his floors, baked hard brown bread, stitched a tear in his work shirt, and never once asked him why half the doors in the house still groaned open onto empty rooms he never entered. She rose before him, slept after him, and carried her silence around her like armor. Jonah had seen armor before. Now she stood in his kitchen with the shotgun braced clean and sure against her shoulder, no tremor in her hands, no fear in her face. What's in the trunk? He asked. Her jaw tightened. Something that doesn't belong to you. That's my house. That trunk was put in your keeping, she said. Not your possession. His fingers slipped from the latch. The words struck deeper than the gun. Years ago, before Dry Hollow was his, and before silence became the shape of his life, a man named Lena Vale had ridden to this ranch at midnight with a split lip, a broken wrist, and a tin cash box wrapped in burlap. Jonah could still see him under lantern light, breathing hard, mud to his knees, saying only one thing before the posse lights appeared over the ridge. If anything happens to me, keep it closed. Jonah had taken the box. By sunrise, Lena Vale was hanging from the cottonwood near Red Creek, condemned as a thief before any judge ever touched the case. Jonah had not stopped it. He had told himself there had been too many rifles, too much fear, too much Amon Rusk in the crowd with his polished boots and his cold smile and the money to bend men. But excuses rot fast in the memory. What remained was the sight of Tomas kicking against empty air while Jonah stood with his hands at his sides and did nothing. He had hidden the box in Ruth's cedar trunk and never opened it. Not once. The woman took one step closer. Move away from it. Jonah did not move. Who are you? She held his gaze. Then, slowly, she lowered the shotgun just enough for breathing space, though not enough for safety. My father rode here the night before they killed him, she said. The kitchen went still. Wind pressed against the walls. The stove ticked softly as its metal cooled. Jonah felt the years between then and now collapse so fast it stole the warmth from his hands. Tomas, he said. Her throat worked once. You remember his name. He stared at her face the way a man studies a scar he suddenly recognizes. She was leaner than the child in his memory, harder around the eyes, sun-browned and watchful, but now he saw it. The same dark, level gaze. The same slight cleft in the chin. Tomas had once shown him a tin locket with a charcoal sketch of a little girl, 6 or 7 at most, solemn as a judge. Jonah had not thought of it in years. Now it seemed to float up from the dead. Lena, he said. She did not deny it. A horse galloped into the yard. Both of them turned. Hoofbeats hammered the hard ground. A rider came through the gate in a storm of dust and pulled up so sharply the gelding nearly slid. Jonah knew the man before he saw the face. Tall in the saddle. Black coat despite the heat. Silver watch chain across the vest. Amon Rusk. The cattle baron swung down, glanced once at the house, and smiled the way wolves do when they already smell blood. Jonah heard Lena breathe in through her nose, heard the faint click as she reset her grip on the shotgun. Rusk stepped onto the porch and knocked once, slow and deliberate. "Creed," he called through the wood. "I came for the woman." The knock sounded again, heavier this time, like a warning delivered by a hammer. Jonah looked at Lena. The morning light had climbed higher, laying gold across the kitchen floor, but there was no warmth in the room. Her face had gone pale beneath the sun brown, not with fear exactly, but with the cold focus of someone who had spent too long expecting this moment. "How did he find you?" Jonah asked. He never stopped looking. Rusk's voice drifted through the door. "Open up, Creed. I'm in no mood for games." Jonah took the shotgun from Lena before she could resist and leaned it against the table. Not because he doubted she could use it, because if there was shooting, Rusk would bring half the county down on the house. The man did not travel alone in consequence, even when he rode alone in fact. "You came here to find what your father left," Jonah said quietly. "I came here to see whether you were the coward they said you were." That hit its mark. Another knock. "Creed." Jonah drew a breath that tasted like old smoke. In the years since Tomas died, men had called him steady, useful, hard to rattle. None of them knew how often he woke hearing rope strain in the dark. None of them knew how many nights he had stood in the barn with a lantern, staring at that buried trunk in his mind and failing, once again, to open it. Now the daughter of the man he had failed stood in his kitchen asking him, without asking, what kind of man he meant to be today. He moved to the door. Lena caught his wrist. Her fingers were calloused, surprisingly warm. "If you give me to him, he'll kill me before sundown." Jonah looked down at her hand, then up to her eyes. "If I hide you, he'll come back with deputies." "He'll come back anyway." There it was, the clean edge of truth. Jonah opened the door. Rusk stood on the porch with dust on his boots and charm sitting loose on his mouth like it had been tailored there. He tipped his hat 2 inches. "Morning." "Morning," Jonah said. Rusk leaned sideways as if to look past him. "Heard a rumor in town. Heard a woman answering to the name Ada found work out here. I've got a housekeeper." "So I hear." His eyes sharpened. "I'll take a look at her." "No." The word came out flat and simple. It surprised even Jonah by how little effort it took. Rusk's smile did not vanish. It thinned. "You're forgetting who keeps this valley watered, Creed." "I'm remembering who owns my doorstep." For a second, the only sound was the creak of the porch rope and the distant bawling of cattle in Jonah's lower pasture. Then Rusk took one step nearer. He smelled of bay rum, leather, and the kind of money that left other men hungry. "That girl is tied to unfinished business," he said softly. "Business that concerns property, theft, and the murder of decent men." Tomas Vale wasn't a thief. The words slipped out before Jonah could stop them. Rusk's eyes flashed. "Careful." Jonah said nothing. Behind him, he could feel Lena's presence like a struck match. Rusk let the silence stretch, then smiled again, gentler this time, which made it worse. "I'm hosting the county assessor tomorrow at noon. We'll be discussing the irrigation easement that crosses your north field. Be a shame if old paperwork turned inconvenient. Be a greater shame if folks started wondering what kind of company you keep." He lifted a gloved finger toward the house. "Send her away by sunset, and we remain neighbors." He turned, mounted, and rode off without another word. The yard settled slowly after him. Jonah closed the door and stood with his hand on the latch until the hoofbeats faded. When he turned, Lena was already moving. She crossed to the stove, seized the poker, and pried up the loose floorboard beneath the flour bin. From the hollow, she drew a folded oilcloth packet, tied with faded blue thread. Jonah stared. "You found that when?" "Second day." She untied it. Inside lay a brass key, a silver deputy badge blackened with age, and a scrap of paper written in Tomas's hand. "I had to know whether you'd hidden the rest or sold it." Jonah took the note. The paper felt brittle as dry leaves. "If Lena comes, let her choose what truth is worth." He closed his eyes for one hard second. "You were his deputy?" Lena asked, seeing the badge. "For 6 months. And you let them hang him?" "Yes." She nodded once, as if a door inside her had shut. Then she reached for the cedar trunk. Jonah stepped in front of it. Her eyes went dangerous again. "Move." "No. If we open it now, we do it together." "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't." He swallowed. "But if Rusk comes back with men, and we don't know what your father died to protect, then both of us are already buried. The room stayed tight between them. Finally, she gave the smallest nod. Jonah knelt by the trunk, slid the brass key into the lock, and turned it. Metal clicked. Inside lay a tin cash box wrapped in the same burlap he remembered, along with Ruth's blue shawl and a dried sprig of sage gone almost gray with time. Jonah lifted the cash box out. His hands shook once before they steadied. Lena watched every motion. When he opened it, they found land deeds, a survey map of Red Creek Valley, and a ledger with Eamon Rusk's name written again and again beside payments to Judge Hollis, Deputy Finch, and 4 men from the hanging posse. At the bottom rested a photograph. Jonah picked it up. Tomas stood in the center, younger, smiling faintly, one arm around a small dark-haired girl in a stiff white dress. Lena. Folded into the back of the frame was one last paper, stained brown at the edge. Jonah opened it and felt the air leave his lungs. It was a sworn confession from Deputy Finch. Tomas Vale never stole the cattle. Rusk ordered me to sign the warrant and silence any witness. Lena lifted her head sharply as shouts rose from the road below the house. Jonah moved to the window. 5 riders were coming through the cottonwoods, rifles across their saddles, dust rolling behind them like storm smoke. Rusk had not waited for sunset. Back door, Jonah said. Lena was already stuffing the ledger, confession, and deeds into the oilcloth. She moved fast, but not wild. That steadiness under pressure told him more about her than any confession could have. This was no woman who had wandered into Dry Hollow asking for work because she was lost. She had come with a plan, with nerve, and with a willingness to walk straight into the mouth of danger if that was where truth had been buried. The riders split as they reached the yard, 2 breaking toward the barn, 1 circling the corral, the other pair coming for the porch. Rusk rode behind them at a walking pace, hat low, letting hired guns speak first. The sun had climbed fully clear of the ridge now, glaring white off window glass and water troughs. Heat was already rising from the packed earth in waves. Jonah snatched the shotgun, checked both barrels, and shoved a revolver into Lena's hand. She glanced at it once. You trust me with that? I trust Rusk less. A fist slammed against the front door. Creed, a man shouted. Open, or we open it for you. Jonah led her through the pantry, out the rear mudroom, and into the hard, bright morning. Chicken feathers spun across the yard. The air smelled of sun-baked manure, mesquite, and the first bitter edge of gun oil. They ran bent low along the water barrels toward the smokehouse while bullets punched through the kitchen wall behind them, sending splinters across the step. Lena did not scream. She hit the ground behind the smokehouse and fired once around the corner. A rider by the porch reeled in his saddle and cursed, clutching his arm. Jonah heard Rusk bark an order. Barn, Jonah shouted. They sprinted through a storm of dust. A horse in the corral shrieked and reared as another shot cracked past. Jonah vaulted the fence, landed hard, and yanked his best mare free of the rail. Lena climbed onto the roan beside her without waiting to be asked. Then a figure stepped from the barn door with a rifle leveled at Jonah's chest. Ned Sutter. Jonah stopped so sharply dirt slid under his boots. Ned had worked Dry Hollow for 9 years. He had buried Ruth with him, broken horses with him, shared whiskey by winter fires. He was thick-shouldered, squinting, loyal-looking in the way some men wear until loyalty becomes too expensive. Sorry, boss, Ned said. Rusk offered me the south pasture and enough money to quit kneeling to drought. Lena raised the revolver at him. Jonah threw out an arm to stop her shot. Move aside, Ned. Ned's mouth twitched. Can't. The yard rang with hoofbeats as the other riders closed in. Jonah could hear one of them trying the rear of the house, another kicking at the chicken shed door, Rusk somewhere beyond it all, patient as poison. Jonah took one slow step forward. You point that rifle at me, you best mean it. Ned's hands trembled almost too slightly to see. I do. Jonah read the lie anyway. He lunged left. Ned fired. The shot tore through Jonah's sleeve and burned a line of fire across his upper arm. Before Ned could work the lever again, Lena moved. She slammed the roan into him shoulder first, knocking him against the barn door. The rifle flew. Jonah struck Ned once across the jaw with the shotgun stock and sent him sprawling into the dust. Right, Lena shouted. They kicked free of the corral just as Rusk himself appeared from around the house, revolver drawn. He fired twice. One bullet shattered the trough. The second struck Jonah's mare in the flank. The animal screamed. Jonah felt her buck, stagger, then collapse beneath him in a violent tangle of legs and leather. He hit the ground hard enough to see white. Dust filled his mouth. Somewhere above him, Lena wheeled the roan back instead of fleeing. "Go," he rasped. She ignored him. A rider bore down on him from the right. Lena fired from horseback and dropped the man out of the saddle. Then she leaned low, seized Jonah's collar, and dragged him toward the fallen mare's far side as bullets chewed the dirt around them. The world tightened to breath, heat, and impact. Jonah crawled under the dead weight of his horse as more shots rang out. The smell of blood hit him hot and metallic. Flies were already gathering. Lena slid down beside him, face streaked with dust, hair half torn loose from its pins. "We can't outrun them now," she said. Jonah looked toward the ridge behind the barn. "There's an old wash leading to Red Creek. And then we make Russ chase us somewhere he can't lie his way out." He tore a strip from his shirt and tied his bleeding arm one-handed. Lena watched, breathing hard. Around them, the gunfire paused. Rusk was repositioning, thinking. That meant he wanted them alive long enough to recover the papers. Lena reached beneath her collar and pulled out a leather cord. Hanging from it was a small iron ring threaded with a child's brass button. "My father made this from his first harness buckle," she said. "Now," Jonah almost asked, but he saw something in her face that stopped him. "I was wearing it when they hanged him," she said. "You were there. I remember your boots." The words cut cleaner than any knife. "I know," Jonah said. "You looked at me." Her voice shook once, then hardened. "And you looked away." He had no defense left in him. "Yes." Shouts rose from the other side of the mare. One of Rusk's men was flanking wide. Lena tucked the ring back under her shirt. "Then listen carefully, Jonah Creed. I did not come here only for the ledger. I came to decide whether to kill you myself." He met her gaze and nodded once. "Fair." Something like fury and grief crossed her face together. Then hoofbeats pounded closer, and the moment snapped. Jonah rolled, fired the shotgun under the mare's neck, and heard a man cry out. Lena rose to one knee and emptied 2 quick revolver shots toward the barn corner. Wood splintered. A hat flew. Rusk shouted again, angrier now. "Creek wash," Jonah said. They broke from cover and ran bent low through a hail of dust and splinters toward the dry wash behind the ridge. The bank crumbled under their boots as they slid down into thorn and shadow. Behind them came curses, hooves, and the relentless clatter of pursuit. Then, from ahead, a second rider stepped into the wash mouth, blocking the only narrow exit. It was Deputy Finch, the same man whose confession sat inside Lena's oilcloth bundle, and he had a rifle aimed straight at her heart. Deputy Finch looked older than the name on the confession deserved. Time had bent him. His beard had gone white in streaks, and his left eye watered constantly in the sun, but Jonah recognized the narrow shoulders and the habit of chewing the inside of his cheek before speaking. The rifle in Finch's hands was steady enough, though fear twitched around his mouth like a trapped moth. "You two have made enough trouble," he said. Behind them, the wash echoed with approaching riders. Lena raised her revolver. "You wrote it." Finch's eyes flicked to the oilcloth at her side. "Then you found it. You signed my father's death." "I signed what Russ put in front of me." Jonah stepped slightly in front of Lena. "Then finish what you started, Finch. Shoot us and save him the trouble." Finch swallowed. Sweat slid down his temple and darkened his collar. All around them the wash held heat like an oven, but a trickle of shade clung under the clay walls. Sage crushed under Jonah's boots gave off a bitter green smell. From somewhere higher on the bank came the clink of tack and the low, restless sound of horses waiting for orders. "I never meant for it to go that far," Finch said. Jonah laughed once, without humor. "That rope went exactly as far as men like you let it." Lena's hand did not waver. "Move." Finch looked at her fully then, and something broke open in his face. "You were the little girl with the brass button." She did not answer. "I saw you after," he whispered. "At the cottonwood. You kept staring at his boots because you thought if you memorized them, maybe he'd walk back into them." His throat worked. "I went home and burned my deputy coat that night." "Should have burned sooner," Jonah said. Hoofbeats grew louder. Finch shut his eyes for one moment, then dropped the rifle into the dust. Lena took 2 quick steps and kicked it away. "Rusk means to kill us all," Finch said, voice rough now. rushing with the urgency of a man who finally understood the size of the fire behind him. He's got the assessor in his pocket, the judge bought, and half the valley scared of losing water. But he never knew I copied the survey map. I hid the original marker list in the old church above Red Creek. If that map and the confession reach town, he's finished. Jonah stared at him. Why tell us now? Finch gave a broken smile. Because cowardice has already eaten most of my life, and I've got little left worth feeding it. The first of Rusk's riders appeared on the bank above the wash. Go, Finch shouted. He bent, grabbed his dropped rifle, and fired up at the ridge just as shots cracked down toward them. Dirt exploded from the wash wall. Jonah caught Lena's elbow and hauled her deeper along the narrow channel while Finch covered their retreat. The old deputy fired with desperate precision, buying seconds in blood and noise. They did not hear the shot that hit him. They heard only the sudden stop. By the time they reached the bend and risked a glance back, Finch was on his knees in the dust, one hand pressed to his chest, still trying to lever another round into the chamber while Rusk's men spread around him. Keep moving, Lena said. Her voice was thin, but her jaw had locked hard enough to cut glass. The wash spilled them out behind a stand of cottonwoods where the creek still held a ribbon of muddy water under the heat. Jonah's arm throbbed with each heartbeat. Blood had soaked through his makeshift bandage and stiffened the cloth to his skin. Lena noticed, said nothing, and led him beneath the trees. There, in mottled shade, she made him sit against a trunk. Coat off. He obeyed without argument. She tore a strip from her petticoat, cleaned the graze with creek water, and bound it tighter. Her fingers were sure, economical, and unexpectedly gentle. Jonah watched her profile as she worked. The line of concentration in her brow, the loosened strands of black hair clinging to her temple, the set of a woman who had learned long ago that tenderness and survival were not opposites. You patch wounds like a field medic, he said. My mother did, Lena answered. After my father died, she treated drovers and miners for coin. I learned because nobody else would help a widow with a Vale name. Jonah glanced at the brass button cord at her throat, and the silence. She tied the knot and sat back on her heels. Men talk more freely around a woman they believe cannot repeat them. A faint, tired curve touched her mouth. You'd be amazed what ranchers confess over breakfast. He let out the breath that might have become a laugh if the morning had been kinder. For a little while they listened to the creek move through reeds. Wind touched the cottonwood leaves and made them whisper overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. The sound carried loneliness in it. Jonah reached into his vest and drew out something he had carried for years without showing anyone. Ruth's wedding ring, looped on a leather strip. Lena looked at it, but did not speak. She used to tell me silence wasn't empty, he said. Said it only showed a man what he was unwilling to hear. His thumb moved across the worn gold. After Tomas died, I stopped hearing anything worth keeping. Lena's eyes softened, not with forgiveness, but with recognition. She opened her carpet bag and took out a folded scrap of cloth. Inside lay a child's drawing. Charcoal on flour sack fabric, a square house, 2 horses, a man with long arms, and a girl beneath a sun too large for the page. My father drew poorly, she said. But he promised one day we'd build a place near Red Creek. He said good water made better people. She looked toward the hills where Rusk hunted them. He was wrong about that. No, Jonah said quietly. Just wrong about how hard bad men fight to own good water. Their eyes met, and something shifted. Not absolution. Not yet. But a bridge laid across a chasm. Lena stood first. The church. Jonah rose with effort. Half a mile north. Abandoned since the fever winter. She handed him the revolver back. Then we finished this before dark. As they stepped from the cottonwoods, a church bell rang once across the valley. It was impossible. The church had been empty for years. Jonah and Lena froze. Then a second bell note shivered through the heat, followed by smoke rising pale and thin above the ridge. Rusk had gone there ahead of them. They climbed the ridge at a run that was more stubbornness than speed. The abandoned church above Red Creek sat crooked against the sky, its white paint long since blistered away, its steeple listing like a broken finger. Smoke leaked from one side window in lazy gray breaths. The bell rope, cut years ago, now swung from the rafters because someone inside had tied a rein to the clapper and yanked. A summons. A taunt. Jonah and Lena dropped behind a stone wall 30 yards downslope. Rusk stood in the churchyard with 2 remaining riders. Ned Sutter was there too, jaw swollen, wrists bound in front of him with his own reins. Blood ran from a cut over his eye. He had either changed his mind or become useless to the man who bought it. Rusk held a torch in one hand and a revolver in the other. On the church steps knelt old Pastor Bell, hauled from retirement in town or found on the road. Jonah could not tell. The old man's white shirt was dark at the shoulder where someone had struck him. Beside the door lay a cedar crate split open, its contents scattered, mildewed hymnals, brass candlesticks, and rolled survey parchments. He found the marker list, Lena whispered. Not yet, Jonah said, or he wouldn't still be playing theater. Rusk called toward the open valley, voice carrying clear in the heat. Come out, Lena. Bring the ledger, and I may decide only one of you needs burying. Lena's hand closed around the oilcloth packet inside her bag. Jonah looked at her. If you go down there, he kills you the moment he sees it. If we do nothing, he burns the proof and shoots the pastor. You still have the confession. He'll call it forgery. Jonah studied the yard, the riders, the broken hitch rail, the angle of the wind. Then he saw it. The old church cistern half hidden behind sage near the side wall, overflow channel running under the yard toward the bell post. Dry on top, but maybe not below. An idea came hard and fast. Can you shoot that torch from his hand? Jonah asked. At this distance? You said men talk too much around women they underestimate. A glint flashed in her eye. They do. Jonah nodded toward the rear slope. I draw them wide. You cut right through the cemetery stones and get to the cistern. If there's water, drench the bell rope and porch. When I move Rusk left, shoot the torch. Fire and panic will do the rest. And if there's no water, then we improvise and die tired. That almost earned him a smile. He squeezed her shoulder once, brief and firm, then rose behind the wall and fired his revolver into the dirt at Rusk's feet. Every head snapped toward him. Looking for me? Jonah shouted. Rusk's face lit with cold triumph. I knew guilt would drag you into the open. Jonah stepped out farther, favoring his wounded arm just enough to make the weakness believable. You always did mistake guilt for obedience. One rider swung his rifle up. Rusk stopped him with a raised hand. He wanted this himself. Below, Lena vanished into the gravestones. Rusk took a slow step into the yard. You had every chance to survive this quietly, Creed. So did Tomas. The name struck him. Rusk's mouth hardened. Tomas Vale stole land that was wasted on drifters. He exposed what you were. Rusk laughed softly. And what was that? Jonah kept him talking. Kept him turning left, away from the church porch. A man too small to own anything unless somebody else bled for it. That did it. Rusk fired. The bullet clipped Jonah's side and spun him half around. Pain hit like an axe head. He dropped to one knee behind the bell post as the riders opened up. Splinters burst from dry wood. Pastor Bell cried out. Ned threw himself flat. Then the church bell rope darkened. Water streamed down it. Lena burst from the side of the church, soaked to the elbows, revolver raised. She fired once. The shot struck the torch near Rusk's fist. Flame spun out, landed in the dirt, hissed uselessly against the water running from the rope and porch boards. Rusk turned, stunned. Jonah came up from one knee and fired back. His shot shattered the revolver in the nearest rider's hand. Ned lunged from the ground, slammed his bound wrists into the second rider's knees, and sent both men sprawling. Everything broke loose at once. Lena crossed the yard low and fast. Rusk drew a hidden derringer from his boot and fired at her. Jonah saw the muzzle flash and moved without thought. He hit her sideways. The ball tore through his shoulder instead of her throat. They both crashed into the wet church steps. Rusk ran for the scattered parchments. Lena, breathless and furious, snatched up the fallen torch handle and hurled it. It struck his ankle. He stumbled. Jonah forced himself up, vision pulsing red at the edges, and tackled Rusk hard enough to drive them both into the graveled yard. They rolled in dust, fists, and blood. Rusk was stronger than he looked and mean in the way of men who had never believed consequences applied to them. He drove a thumb into Jonah's wound, bucked him off, and reached for a knife at his belt. Jonah caught his wrist. Rusk bared his teeth. You think one good deed wipes clean 15 years? No, Jonah grunted. But it's a start. The knife wavered between them. Then Lena was there, not with a bullet, but with Finch's confession in one hand and the survey marker list in the other, both raised high over the yard. "Amen, Rusk," she shouted, voice ringing across church stone and open sky. "Pastor Bell hears you. Ned Sutter hears you. Jonah Creed hears you. Tell them whose land you stole. Tell them who ordered Tomas Vale killed." Rusk froze. That was the mistake. Not because of witnesses. Men like him survived witnesses. But because truth spoken aloud can crack the rhythm of violence just long enough for justice to find a seam. Jonah twisted. The knife came free. He flung it away and drove one hard fist into Rusk's jaw. The Baron fell back against a grave marker, dazed. Pastor Bell, trembling but upright now, lifted his voice. "Say it, son. Before God and the living, say it." Rusk spat blood and tried to rise. Ned, hands still bound, planted a boot on his chest. "Stay down." Rusk looked from one face to another and saw at last what had changed. Not the law, not the valley, the fear. It had shifted owners. He laughed once, ragged and beaten. "Fine. I signed the warrant. I paid Finch. Tomas found the original Creek grants, and I couldn't have that. Happy now." Lena's eyes shone, but her hand stayed steady. Pastor Bell heard every word. So did the riders still conscious enough to repeat it in town. So did Jonah, who felt something inside him loosen for the first time since the cottonwood. By sunset, Rusk rode to jail in his own wagon with both hands shackled. Ned walked behind it under guard. Pastor Bell carried the survey list. Lena carried the ledger. Jonah rode beside them with his shoulder bound, and his silence changed. Weeks later, the county court restored the Red Creek parcel to Lena Vale. Finch was buried on a hill overlooking the water he had been too afraid to defend in life. Ned served his sentence and came back leaner, soberer, willing to work for wages instead of whispers. Jonah offered him a place only after making him earn it. Lena did not leave Dry Hollow. At first she stayed because the house still needed mending and the ranch ledger still made Jonah swear under his breath. Then she stayed because the north field greened after the ditch gates were reset, because Ruth's roses surprised them by blooming again along the porch, because some griefs become lighter only when carried where they were made. One evening in early autumn, Jonah brought Ruth's cedar trunk onto the porch and set it in the fading gold light. "It was never mine," he said. Lena laid her father's drawing inside it, beside Ruth's shawl and the blackened deputy badge. "Then let it keep what truth cost." Years later, travelers passing the Red Creek Road would slow near a white house with a repaired roof, a strong fence line, and children's laughter drifting from the yard on summer evenings. They would see two names carved into the porch beam: Ruth, for what was loved, and Tomas, for what was finally honored, and below them, in smaller careful letters, another name that had turned the house from a grave back into a home. At dusk, when the wind moved through the cottonwoods and the creek caught the last fire of the sun, Lena Vale and Jonah Creed would stand side by side on the porch, looking over land no longer ruled by silence, while the brass button at her throat flashed once like a small hard star before night came down.